Once you do that, it'll start, right?
It's starting right now.
You can crop it.
Alright. You're going.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so again, my name is John Tucker. I work at UF Health, and I got real excited about Firebase, mostly because, well, how it caught my attention was Google bought them for $500 million like about a month ago. And I was like, well, you know, I'm a kind of a Google fan, and whatever they're doing kind of catches my attention. And so, I mean, in terms of background, what really caught my eye on this is I've always been looking for faster and easier ways of developing apps, mobile apps. And I've tried Python, I've tried Node, I kind of got into Node lately. I'm trying to figure out all these frameworks on the back end to keep my life real simple. And I bumped into Firebase, and I did their kind of hello world in about 5 minutes, and I've not looked back. I've done about 3 projects since then. Stuff that took me months to do took me days. So, and we'll just go walk through it. So I actually did the same presentation at the Gainesville bar camp. So I spent a little more time on this mystery slide here. I'm just going to breeze through it very quickly because this is more of a technical crowd than what was there. But what this series of slides that we're not going to go through here basically talks about is kind of the evolution of what the server did from back in the 1990s to today. And so way back when, and I'm sure some of the stuff we do today is still like that. The server does most of the logic, generates the HTML, kind of all the flow happens on the server. So I mean, to some degree, I think Drupal's like that, where there's heavy on the server side. That's been around for for a very long time. About 10 years ago, people started doing Ajax, where you're basically now taking the server and all it's doing is spitting out data, and most of your logic now lives on your client. So it's a lot of heavy client JavaScript code, lighter server code. And then that evolved. People were doing things kind of hard-coded on the server. More recently, there's been frameworks to simplify the server, so now the server code keeps on shrinking. You got like Ruby and Rails, which even more structures your server code to the point where it's almost just configuration. And the most recent evolution, in the last couple of years, is instead of having to do all these requests back and forth, now you're finding people just opening up sockets, these web sockets to the server, and you're passing data back and forth, asynchronously. Your server can actually push down data to your client without your client even asking for it. And so what Firebase essentially is now like the ultimate extension of this, where your server code is essentially zero, but you have a fairly powerful environment where you can build real web apps with like no server code, which is hard to believe. But so what I was going to do is I was going to go through a series of slides that kind of tell you what Firebase is, and this is essentially their 5-minute tutorial, just kind of hashed out. And then I'll go a little bit more into some of the things I've learned since then. So the first thing you need to know about Firebase is that they're a cloud service. You don't install it yourself. And what essentially is a NoSQL database where data is stored in trees of data. So what I'm representing on the screen here, you're seeing basically, this is JSON notation, if you don't already recognize it. And you've got objects that are nested on each other. In this case, if you look to the left there, you're basically seeing, I've got 3 objects. They each have a name and a text. It's kind of part of their child's. And then what you're seeing on the right side of this is essentially what you see when you're looking at the data through their web interface. Okay. So again, just think of it just an infinitely long depth of stuff. And then any particular point, you can have Boolean, you can have strings, you can have numbers. I think you have like a 250 megs of string value, so you can store like an encoded binary value in there if you were so inclined. Okay, so what the next thing is. So now you know what the data looks like. So the typical there's 3 main operations when you retrieve data. The first one is you go to a point in the tree and you say, give me the value of that point in the tree. And what it does is it gives you the whole tree, subtree underneath it. So that's one kind of value. When you're reading data, you say, just give me the value of everything here and down. So obviously, if you go to the root of it, you may get a lot of data, right? The next thing you can do when you're retrieving data is you can say, oh, okay, I want to monitor this point in the node and tell me every time a child is added to this tree. and it'll send you basically that data. Because this is, we'll see in a minute, but this is a live socket that's open, so you can say, I want to monitor that point in the tree, and then tell me anytime anything's added. So that's child added. So, and again, there's a little visual thing that's very appealing, because while you're coding, when you add a child, it'll go green for about 2-3 seconds. You say, oh, I just did that. Or something did that, and you can see it got added. And then you can also monitor removals of a tree. So you can say, oh, something got removed, and then you can do something in your code. Okay, so those are the 3 main operations. And now in terms of saving data, there's a couple other ones, but this is the simple ones. You've got either setting or you're pushing. Setting is you're going to a point in the tree and saying, this is what you need to be. So that point in the tree down, you just set all the data. So you can store arbitrarily long depth. Push is kind of like you're doing an insert on a table. You're telling it, at this point in the tree, push a new value on there, and they'll auto-generate a key for you, basically. So they generate keys for you. So in this case, you just say, here's the structured data, push it on there, and they'll generate a key for you and hand you back your object, and now you just added the object. So that's another operation you do for writing. There's also update, where you can update just parts of a tree, where it just does like a difference. But the example I have here doesn't do that. It's just a very simple set and push. So this Hello World is essentially the Hello World that you'll build if you go through their 5-minute tutorial on their website. And the first thing, just to give you the framework of this is the HTML for my Hello World. So, and let me step back for a second, tell you what the kind of end result is. I'm building basically a message board where I can post a name and a message. It'll get stored in the database, okay? And it'll automatically update my UI. So if I hit post, it'll add to the list. And what's the magic of this is if I had 3 of these browsers open, they all see the same thing. So if I post on one, all 3 of them now would all of a sudden see the same data. So data is being pushed down to the other ones. Okay, so this is very simple HTML, right? I got a head. In this case, just to help me with the UI, it's not a requirement for the library, but just to help with the simple pushing data onto the screen, there's jQuery, right? It's nothing fancy. And then you basically use this Firebase client, which everything you're doing is to that Firebase client. And then I basically have I start up the script with the JavaScript, documents ready, and then the JavaScript's what we'll talk about primarily. So in terms of, we'll go through the pieces of this here. So let's start off with, I did this in JS Fiddle. So I'm basically, this is it. And that was the HTML behind the scenes, and this is basically what you did in JS Fiddle. So what's that thing doing?
Someone's trying to ping me.
Oh. So the HTML up top, basically, if you kind of think back what you just saw earlier, that first div right there is what contains the messages, right? The Susie said this, John said this, Bob said this. That's what I'm going to basically jam the data into. I have an input, a name input, and a input for the message. Pretty simple. I mean, not much there. So here is now where I start using Firebase. The first thing I do, I need to tell it where my Firebase is. So I'm pointing, basically that first reference is my data reference, that's my reference to my Firebase database, basically. And I say Firebase, and I give it the URL. So I just, you basically, to build your own, it's free. You go there, you say create a new application. You name it, and there you go. The next line is display chat message. Is basically I'm just taking an input of name and text, and I'm doing a little bit of jQuery just to basically append it to that div that was the messages div. So there's nothing fancy there. And so I can't remember where I did this. Right, so then here's where the Firebase comes on. The first thing says MyDataRep on child added. So I'm taking the data ref, and I say, okay, I'm monitoring for any child being added to that data store. Okay, so that function gets called now. At that point forward, that every time something child gets added, the server will basically trigger this, and my function gets called with a snapshot of the data that got added. Okay, so that's it. I basically parse out the message. There's a dot value, it's a key value. So there's snapshot.key, that's the key of it. Snapshot.value is the data that's stored in it. It's just a JavaScript object at that point. And I call it display chat message, and extract out the name and the text. So that's pretty straightforward. Okay. So that's it for reading the data. Now, every time, if I was to do nothing else at that code, if I was to go somewhere else and manually go into the database and create a child there, this code would run, and I would see the new child element added. Now, one thing, it's not obvious here, the first time you run this data ref on child added, it will recognize that it's not initialized itself, and it'll take all the current children and push them all through to you, so that it'll catch you up. So now you have all your child. And then the last part here is, I'm just monitoring the input on the message, and I say every time I hit return, I extract out the value of the two input fields, and I do a push. Okay, so I'm telling it, take the data ref, push the name and value, and what that does is it will auto-generate a key and jam it in the database, which then, in this particular code, would automatically, on child added will now add it automatically. My other function will get called automatically. That's basically the whole code. So now you've got a real-time socket, multiple clients basically doing a chat board in now on the server side, I guess we should talk about what's on the server side. This server-side code, there's zero server-side code. I literally go to the app and I say, I want a new database. I type in just the string, Gainesville Bar Camp, and boom, I'm done. So that's it. Okay, now there's a little bit, so I think we need to talk a little bit more about, there's a little bit more to the server than just that, because the first thing you may be thinking is, there's no security, anybody can write anywhere. This is kind of like Wild West. I mean, you don't set a schema on the server side, you just say, start writing data to it. So this is where you need to do some things on the server side to maybe protect your data more. So they have a whole set of security rules and validation rules you can apply to your server now, where you basically start locking down what can be jammed onto the server, so that people just don't spray data all over the place. So what this particular one is, the rules basically say, right now I'm not doing any real validation on who you are. So the first read and write true basically means anybody can read and write anywhere they want. I'm not doing any authentication. Typically you can do, we'll talk about authentication in a minute. So I'm not really validating who you are and what you can do. But at least what I'm doing is I'm doing a little bit of validation. So the first message ID here, it says, I can't remember if I zoom in on it. No, I didn't. So just a representative here under message ID. So I'm looking for a thing called message ID, and I'm validating that it actually has children called name and text. It'll reject it. So if you try to pass in something that doesn't have name and text, it's going to barf out on you. Okay? And then I'm actually making sure that name is a string and not some giant object you're going to throw at me. Right? And basically the catch-all at the bottom basically says, I'm going to basically anything else that doesn't meet these rules, I'm going to barf out on you. You're going to start writing other strings, I'm going to throw it away for you. So this basically protects my data, so at least, I'm not authenticating you, but at least I know what structure of data is going in there. It's not just random stuff. So that's basically the server-side code right there. So the other thing that they have built into this whole thing is they have a whole infrastructure for doing authentication already built in there. So they have a whole email and password authentication with password resets. You can request email to be generated on recovering your password. They have integrations to Facebook, Twitter, GitHub, Google, a sort of anonymous login, and then you could also write your own custom integration where you basically generate your own tokens, and you can have, you can authenticate wherever you want through their engine. Okay. So just to sample the kind of code you look at when you're doing authentication on the client side. So now you're back in your JavaScript, and so basically there's basically the example I have here has to do with this auth with OAuth redirect. Might be like a Facebook. You're basically going to tell it to go to Facebook, do a redirect back to you. And again, the configuration of the server is basically copying your keys out of Facebook into their UI, and you're done. And then that one line. And then you're monitoring this on-off is monitoring your logged in status. Are you logged in? Are you not logged in? Who are you? It'll pass you some idea who you are. Okay, and then on the server, you basically now can set up rules. Like for example, now I could say .write. I better make sure the auth is not null. If it's null, it means they're not authorized somehow. If I put that one line at the top, now that app would not work unless I was logged in with Facebook or some sort of authorization. So in terms of compatibility, now I'm mostly just using it just with. I'm using Angular on the client side for real. I mean, that's my actual applications, and then that's it. It's web Angular. But they have iOS libraries you can tie in. They have Android libraries. They have a Java libraries. They have all these libraries that will basically you can do the same things without having to write your own code. And then the one thing they also have is a REST API. If you don't want to use any of the libraries, you can just they provide automatic REST APIs. You know, the puts, the gets, all that with no coding on your part. So that was really what I did at the presentation for Barcamp. I just have 3 more slides of things I've learned since then that are kind of interesting. One is, so on retrieving data, so one of the things that you run into, let's say you're writing an app that's multi-page app, right? So it's a single page app, but it's got multiple screens on it, right? And you set up one of those listens for child ads on one of the pages. Well, if you browse to the next page, that callback is still kind of active, even though you're on a second page. You don't want that callback actually being called when you're on another page. So before you move pages, you might want to detach your callbacks and say, no, if a child's added over there, I don't care anymore. So that's what this MyDataRep off. You basically tell you, just turn off, I don't want to monitor that anymore. And then you may be monitoring different nodes of the tree on your second page. So that's the first thing you figure out. The next thing you figure out is most of the apps I'm more familiar with are like REST-based. So I go get the data, and then I'm done. I don't need this whole, if someone adds a child at that moment, I don't really need to know that, right? I kind of want to know it's more static. So they provide a method called once. So it doesn't tie that function essentially gets called once. So you don't have to keep on detaching things. So that's most of the code I've been doing. 90% of it, I'm just doing a bunch of these onces. So then another thing you do, and I haven't really used this feature, but you have a node of tree and you might want to parse out just parts of it. Like you want to start filtering like a query. So you basically order it by something and then you can do ranges of things. It's kind of a poor man's query, like a select statement in SQL. If you structure your data right, at least, I don't know if you do a lot of querying, but I haven't used any of mine. Another thing to think about is this thing actually, now I haven't used this feature either, but this thing operates offline too. So you push data and you're offline for some reason, it's going to store it in a local store, return back your functions. Everything will operate like it's connected to the internet, okay? And once it's connected, it'll catch itself up. So one of the things you might want to know is whether you're offline or online, so that, was that socket open or not? So they have a method to detect your connected state, basically. This one's kind of cool too. So one of the example apps I have is like a little chat board or something where I know you're on or you're not, are you on or not on? I can see who's on at that given moment. Well, what happens if someone just closes the browser out or kills the internet connection? I need to somehow detect, without my client code running, something has to change in the server to reflect that I'm not there anymore. So they have a method where in your code you can say, okay, on a disconnect, on this, this part of the tree, on a disconnect, do something. Remove, update, set. That actually stores that code, that operation gets stored on the server, and it's watching, and if all of a sudden I close my browser or I kill my internet connection, that function gets called without my client doing anything. And now I've got, it's like, you could use that for like a presence app. And then, I think I already mentioned that the offline behavior, you can use this as basically, instead of having to write your own local storage stuff, you let them do it all, and you can just deal with it'll synchronize everything for you. The last bit of here is, basically what you do is now your code essentially is just static, HTML with JavaScript. You need to store it somewhere. You can put it on your own servers. wherever you want to put it. They actually provide, you basically can host it with them. And they, in this case, you just get a subdomain of firebaseapp.com, or you can have your own custom. It's all secure, SSL. Everything's SSL through this whole thing. So all the transactions are all SSL. And you have some server configuration. You can set up redirects, rewrites, and then you can do some basic, very basic header rewriting through their server by a little configuration file. And I think that is really all I was going to do today. So I would encourage you to try it. Questions?
And Google does it for free?
So this right here, they have developer account. They have developer accounts, and you get like, and we can look it up real quick. It's a fairly generous, right? Fairly generous thing. I could probably run most of my basic apps on this, but they actually have like a $20 a month service, or they have scales up. And it really, the key here is I think I can have, the real limitation is I can only have 50 simultaneous connections into my app. Because remember, these are all live connections. So a free one, I can have 50 basically clients running at the same moment.
Wow, that's so
That's good enough for like the simple apps.
When you put the right authorized email, basically when you do authentication, what do you have to do on the view on the client side?
So on the client side, you have to first authenticate somebody, right?
But I mean, let's say the Facebook login, like, do you get the code from Facebook and?
So what you do is, just a simple example, I actually have an app that does Facebook login, right? What you do, you basically go to Facebook, you create a developer account there, you generate your app in their world, which generates a client secret and a client identifier, a key. So you get 2 strings. You copy those, you go to Facebook, Firebase, and you say, I want Facebook authentication. You copy those 2 strings in there, right? So you are handing your key over to Firebase, but oh well. So then you store it there, you hit save, and then you're done from the server side. The client side is basically one line of code saying, client on redirect, basically it's like OAuth. I think I had it in here. I can't remember the name of it right now, but it's like on off or something like this.
Yeah,
OAuth, and it'll then redirect to Facebook. You basically pass your client ID to it, right? It goes to Facebook. It pops up. You log in, hands it back to your app, and they take care of all the tokens behind the scenes. You basically have you don't do anything with tokens. You just basically deal with their function. And what will happen is an on-off function will get called with passing back an object that basically has the person's username, whatever data you ask for Facebook. You can ask for lots of data, a little bit of data.
And you don't need any of Facebook's code, like their open graph code at all?
No.
Because they keep updating it like every...
Right, you don't, this is for basic authentication. Now, if you want to do more stuff, like get deeper into their tree of stuff, then you're going to have, this is really just authentication.
Right, got it.
This isn't just to give you who the person is.
Got it.
And then you can use that identity in your code to say, oh, only allow John Tucker to read this data, or only allow you to store your own data, and you can't read someone else's data. Yeah.
Does it support IE6?
Probably not.
What's the browser support?
I don't actually know off the top of my head. So my personal interest is more mobile apps.
Yeah.
I'm not less interested in broad-based browser, so I've been doing mostly mobile app stuff.
So more on a comment, not a question, but just a background of Firebase or mobile backend services. Firebase came out very recently. There's another company called Parse, which is created by ex-Googlers. Google was bidding for it, and Facebook bought it. So they provide. So this one's pricing is 50 maximum sockets,
Right.
and 5 or 10 gigs of data transfers and data storage, and
It's for the free account, probably.
yeah, that's a free account. Parse has 5 times that volume, all free again. And
Isn't that the same business model?
same business model. Google bid for it. Facebook bought it for 85. Google didn't 85 million. Google didn't want to bid for it, but now I think they paid a lot more for
They
this.
paid for, I thought it was $500 million for this thing.
Right. So because they lost that bidding war. That was 2011.
Okay.
So they went for this. So
Yeah.
now that Google got it, my gut feeling is that pricing thing is gonna just go way past 50 sockets, and that data, Google has a lot of data on it, sitting like servers.
They'll open it up more, I think.
ton.
Now, one of the things I know that I've been trying to figure out, one thing I couldn't do with this easily right now is, let's say I save some data and maybe I want some other operation to happen from the server side. Let's say an email gets sent off or some other trigger. You know, I save data, but now I don't want to rely on the client to maybe do something. I want the server to then trigger do something else. Apparently, that's one of the things that when Google bought them, that's one of the things that apparently they're going to extend it with is these triggers where, and then so you can hit all this Google APIs. You know, on some you add an object here, and all of a sudden you got all the Google APIs exposed to you, and you can do all sorts of things on the back end of this thing.
Right. I mean, again, like same thing. It's the same development cycle. After Facebook bought it, they started having push notifications.
Right.
This, I'm sure, when Google gets their hands on it, it'll have push notifications and also analytics. It's just going to sync up with Google Analytics, and then you don't have to worry about who opened your app and trying to find like client-side code to figure out when anyone opened it or things like that. They're just going to take care of it for you.
Okay.
So yeah, it's really easy to set up apps like that.
Yeah, I built a really we don't have time for it, but I did build like this week a fun little app like supposed to simulate clapping where you can have a room full of people and if they touch the screen, you can see everyone kind of clapping on their screen, and just kind of fun way of representing the fact that it's very easy to build collaborative apps with this thing. But we got other people here, so.
Yeah.
Okay, well that's it. I think we had other people too, so I don't want to hog all the time up.